Assalamualaikum and a very good morning to our panels and lecturers. Today, I'm Khairulanwar. Will be presenting about my final year project. So, let's go. So, welcome to my presentation. My final year project topics is challenges on halal implementation in food service industry among restaurants owned by Bumiputera, specifically at Bandar Bangi, Selangor. I'm the presenter, Khairulanwar bin Ahmad Hisham, and my supervisor is Professor Madya Dr. Ainy binti Mahyudin. So, in this presentation, I will be presenting about 6 content, which is first, introduction, literature review, methodology, results and discussion, conclusion, and the last one is reference. So, for the introduction, what is halal? The word halal is derived from Arabic word which is halal yahillu, hilan, or halalan, which means allowed or permissible by the Sharia law. Halal also means anything that is allowed or lawful according to the Quran, commonly used in the context of acceptable food. So, Malaysia halal certification is under the authority of JAKIM, and it is also followed Malaysian standard halal food, which is MS 1500 2009, and it provides for greater consumer confidence, and it also useful for branding and marketing. Even though there are benefits in applying and implementing halal in the food service business, but there are still a huge number of food service entrepreneurs that does not want to apply the halal certification, especially for Bumiputera. It then lead to our problem statement, which is in 2011 until 2015, there were increment in the number of halal certified company. However, if you can see, in 2014, only 33% of Bumiputera halal certified company, and also in 2015, there is only 32%. In 2017, there are only 30% of Bumiputera halal applicant, and there are only 32% in 2018. And for the latest one, in 2019, the number of halal Bumiputera certified company even worse, as it is only 29% for the last year. So, why is this happening? Why the number of Bumiputera halal applicants are much lower than non-Bumi? We know that most of Bumiputera in Malaysia is Muslim, and Muslims are compulsory to practice halal in our daily life. Therefore, this research want to find the reason and factor why this is happening. So, 3 objectives have been set up in this research, which is first, to investigate the awareness of halal implementation. The second one is to study the compliance of halal practices, and the last one, to identify the challenges in implementing halal. So next, let's move on to literature review. Here are some of the example of previous research that have some objectives from my research, but their samples and informants were different, as some of them collecting data from non-halal certified restaurant only. And the result, most of the restaurant owner cannot fulfill the requirement of halal applicants, and 3 factors are found to be significant, which is lack of knowledge, suppliers issues, and governance issues. And the last one is restaurant managers feels that halal certification is very complicated in the hospitality industry. So, let's move on to the methodology. So, for this research, I have been using qualitative research approach, as we need to have a very depth understanding on the informant's opinion about halal certification. And next, for the research instrument, I conducted a face-to-face interview session at their restaurant, and I have been using an open-ended question during the interview. For the sampling technique, I use a purposive sampling technique in order to determine the samples, because this research needs specific informants to gain the desired input as well as data to achieve the research objective. So, the samples need to fulfill these criteria to participate in this research. First, the informants must be a Bumiputera restaurant owner, and the restaurant itself must not have halal certified. And the last one is the restaurant must be located at Bandar Baru Bangi, Selangor. So why Bandar Baru Bangi? It is because Selangor has 19.8% of Bumiputera SMEs as compared to the other states. And Bandar Baru Bangi is located at Hulu Langat district, which have over 60% of Bumiputera residents. Therefore, Bandar Baru Bangi was selected as one of the characteristics in this research. Next, for sample size, I have been choose 6 informants, and for the data collection, first I will approach potential informants, then we call and email for confirmation, and then if the informants agreed, we will set the desired time for both of us to conduct the interview session, and then conducted the interview and observed the restaurant, jotted down important point, and lastly I gave them this homemade souvenir that I craft by myself to the restaurant owner as a token of gratitude to willingly participate in my research. And lastly, for the data analysis, first I organize and arrange the data. Second, I use inductive approach to build categories and teams, and lastly I will interpret teams and codes. Alright, so let's proceed to the most exciting part in this research, which is results and discussion segment. So first, the demographic profiles of the informants. This segment, I will use 4 criteria, which is code, status, position, and lastly experience in food service industry. So for the code, I have been using RO1 until RO6, which is stand for restaurant owner 1 to restaurant owner 6. And so for the status, Muslim Bumiputera, and for the position, all the informants are the restaurant owner, and then lastly the experience, which is they have 3 to 5 years and over 5 years, and some of them have 10 years of experience in food service industry. So for the first objective of this research is I want to know how aware the informants towards the halal knowledge. I have crafted my questionnaire to gain the information about the halal knowledge. Then I group them into 4 categories, which is first, the understanding of the concept of halal, including the religion aspect and their daily practices in the restaurant. The prohibition and restriction about halal also have been asked. The second, the awareness on halal certification guidelines, whether they're aware or not. The third one, I asked about their Muslim staffs, either they have enough Muslim staffs or not, and why they are choosing the Muslim staffs instead of non-Muslims. The last one, responsibility on implementing halal certification. So for the first categories, the understanding on the concept of halal, all the informants understand on the concept of halal and haram, which is a good. And the second one, the awareness on halal certification guidelines. 4 out of 6 does not aware about the halal certification guidelines. And the next one is Muslim staffs. What is the importance of Muslim staff have been asked, and all the informants will agree that Muslim staff is very important for the restaurant. And the last one is the responsibility on implementing halal certification. All of the informants will agree of these categories. So based on the result, we can conclude that the awareness of Bumiputera restaurants owners on knowledge about halal is 83%, and it is quite high. So let's move on to the other objectives. The second objective, which is the compliance of halal practices. The compliance of halal practices among Bumiputera owned restaurant have been divided into 6 categories, which is first, cleanliness of premise. Second, staff grooming, supplier selection, equipment finishing, ingredient selection, and the last one is documentation. For cleanliness of premise, all the informants are comply with the JAKIM's halal audit checklist. And the next one is staff grooming. All of the informants also comply with the staff's grooming practices. And the third one, 3 out of 6 will not comply with the supplier selection, as some of them were taking supplies of ingredients which are from home-based production that does not have halal certificate at all. Hence, they not comply with the supplier selection which required by halal certified. And next one, 2 out of 6 will not comply with this category as they have not fulfilled the criteria equipment needed in order to apply halal. For example, garbage can used in the restaurant were often used by hand instead of using leg. And next one is ingredient selection. So all of the informants is comply with this ingredient selection, which is they need to find a halal product. And the last one is a documentation part. It's the most critical part where all of the informants did not comply, as they mentioned that the documentation process were very complicated. Therefore, based on the results, we can conclude that the compliance of Bumiputera restaurants towards halal practices is only 69%, and it is needed a lot of improvement later. So next, let's proceed to the main challenges that occurred among Bumiputera owned restaurant. The first challenges that emerged is documentation problems. As stated before, all of the informants will not comply with the documentation requirement as they are hardly to get their suppliers a halal certification, and they do not listed their ingredient list with halal certification. Therefore, they need to start from scratch, and it is a tough process as they have hundreds or even thousands of ingredients. Next, lack of information about guidelines and procedures of halal certifications. The informants stated that they did not totally aware about the halal procedure or guidelines. This is because government, especially JAKIM, does not advertise any guidelines for apply halal. As a result, the informants did not aware. Plus, they did not excited to apply halal at all. The next challenge is a customer preference. The informants explained that their customers does not even care about the halal logo in the restaurants or whatsoever. They only care about the owner of the restaurants. If the customers know the owner of the restaurant is Malay and Muslims, it is absolutely okay with it. Therefore, the restaurant owner itself think that there are no benefits gained if they apply halal certification, and their sales are still high, even though the majority of the community at Bandar Bangi is Malay. And the last challenges is limitation of selecting supplier. Informants explain that some of the supplier does not have halal certification, which they are based only at home, so they did not manage to have halal certification. We think that it is easy to simply change the ingredient from that supplier to the other supplier that have halal certification, but it is not that simple as we think, because the informant stated that the ingredients that have been used from that non-halal certified supplier supply the main ingredient for their signature dish or menu. Change the ingredients means change the taste as well as the nature of that signature dish. Therefore, limitation of supplier is one of the challenges emerged in this research. So the conclusion is we can conclude that awareness and knowledge about halal is high, which is 83%, and the compliance of halal practices is moderate, which is 69%. And 4 challenges on implementing halal certification have been identified. Next, the limitation and recommendation. The first limitation is limitation on generalizing of the concept. This is because this research use qualitative research approach and only use a small sample. Therefore, for the future research, it is recommended to use quantitative research approach, which is have a larger sample and will gain more extensive and broad results. And next one is This research is only focused on Bumiputera owned restaurants, and the solution is only can be implemented for Bumiputera owned restaurants. Therefore, for the future research, it is recommended to involve other Bumiputera food service industries players, for example, food truck and bakery, and then the future solution can be implemented to those industry, to those food service industry as well. And the last one is pandemic COVID-19 crisis. It also have affect this research framework and approachability to get more number of informants. Therefore, for the future research, it is recommended to have a proper and reasonable time to avoid limited number of informants issues, as well as the research will run as planned. And the last one is these are some of the references that I use for my research. Therefore, my presentation have come to the end. Thank you so much for your time and attention. I really appreciate it. If you have any question, feel free to ask me at the Q&A session. Thank you so much. Assalamualaikum.